Big news today, because they've been talking about Grenfell in Westminster again. And as I mentioned earlier on, who can forget that awful day? It was a June day, and I was driving into it, listening to this story on the radio that was just... They were just kind of breaking through, really, and it was early. I was on breakfast, so it's 4:30 in the morning. So you're flipping around trying to find news and trying to get your phone to give you updates. And there was a fire in London. That's all we knew. And I got to work and I watched the TV, and it was the most horrendous thing I think I've ever seen. We just all kind of sat there and stared and watched it happen and tried to work out what we were supposed to do. The station up north. And how we were going to talk about what was happening. We did it. It was awful. And then we talked about it for days afterwards. Well, still, 7 years on, MPs are apologising. But there's still work to do. Now, Sir Keir Starmer, he's apologised to those affected by the Grenfell Tower fire, telling MPs that the country failed to discharge its most fundamental duty to protect people. In a statement to the Commons, the Prime Minister said that the tragedy poses fundamental questions about the kind of country we are.
A country where the voices of working class people and those of colour have been repeatedly ignored and dismissed. A country where tenants of a social housing block in one of the richest parts of the land are treated like second-class citizens.
Labour's Sheffield South East MP Clive Betts has followed the Grenfell Tower disaster closely, with his work as the former chair of the government's Housing Committee. He says that this is more than about the victims of Grenfell, but also people today still living in unsafe tower blocks.
If one thing happens today from the final report from the inquiry, there must be extra pressure on the new government now to get on and make sure that all these buildings are made safe.
Well, Rachael Loftus is from the Leeds Cladding Scandal campaign group. She's been telling me about her situation.
So at the end of 2019, there was an advice notice put out by government who, following the Grenfell Tower a couple of years before that, recognised that there were some more dangerous materials than just the cladding that had been on the Grenfell Tower. And they put out this advice note that told all the owners, all the freeholders of tall buildings, that they must check that they had the right type of cladding, that the right type of insulation, and that the fire breaks in buildings were safe. And unfortunately, when they started doing those checks, they uncovered a litany of defects. And that's both things that shouldn't have ever been done in that way in the first place, even were against building regs at the time, and then other things that they've recognised that in combination with each other could cause a problem like it did in Grenfell.
So I'm guessing this brings into your arena all sorts of problems. Firstly, ones of safety, very current and very real issues of safety. But also, what does it do to the value of your property?
Well, so since that initial assessment on my building was done in early 2020, my property is valued at £0. I have to continue paying my rent. I have to continue paying my council tax. I have to... I'm going to ask, can I re-answer that? Because I just said I have to pay my rent, which I don't, because I'm a mortgage.
Sure.
Mortgage, sorry.
Yeah.
So since the assessment was done on my building in early 2020, my property is actually technically valued at £0. It can't be sold and it can't be mortgaged. And that's because there's the defects with the building need to be put right before anyone else can own it. So until then, that's technically the value of my flat. But I have to keep paying my mortgage. I have to keep paying my ground rent. I have to keep paying my management fees and my council tax and everything else. As though it was still worth something.
I mean, that's just horrific, isn't it? And all along you're living in something which you don't know how safe it is.
Yeah, it really beggars belief when you put it in that terms like that. It should almost be that I should be compensated for having been sold a building that's so dangerous, rather than actually being forced to pay continually for the upkeep and maintenance of it, to pay additional work, to put interim safety measures in place, to pay massively hiked up insurance. My insurance is now about 12 times what it was in 2019. For the buildings insurance, it was £3,800 this year, to give you an example of that. It's crazy that there's both this kind of recognition that there's an urgent problem with buildings like mine, but then absolute slow glacial pace from the people who are responsible for putting it right.
I mean, I'm guessing you've looked at all sorts of arenas, and they must be there, because I'm just thinking, and I know, I mean, you probably shouldn't think this. If I don't pay my mortgage, the mortgage company come and they take my house away and they sell it. If you don't pay your mortgage, what do?
Well, it's funny. A few leaseholders have actually asked that of their mortgage companies because they couldn't afford to pay things like the interim costs. And the mortgage companies basically say you've still got to pay your mortgage, and then you're still responsible for any additional costs that might incur. So, for example, the building safety costs for mine, we had a waking watch installed for about 9 months, which was literally just two guys in a high-vis jacket looking at the building in case it went on fire. We had to pay for that, and that was in thousands and thousands of pounds. So even if you gave your keys back to the bank or the building society, they would still charge you any of those additional costs on top of whatever else that they would have to pay out to do it. So it's just in this completely stuck position that people like me are both being asked to live with the unsafety, and then we're facing the financial penalties of somebody else delaying putting the building right.
Rachel, that's absolutely horrendous. You find yourself sometimes where you do an interview where you don't know where to go. Normally the point of an interview is to try and find a solution, and there's nothing here, is there? I mean, I can see just go bankrupt, but then should they fix it, then you've lost your house. I don't know what there is to say to you. You must lie awake at night. It must be really horrible for you.
It is. It's there's a reason our campaign is called Scandal. It really is genuinely scandalous that in this day and age, houses can be built to such poor standards that they can be basically death traps, and that there's no protection in law. Like, we've said it a number of times, but I'd have had more protection if I'd bought a toaster than the flat that I've bought. I've got no legal protections now. Don't get me wrong, since we started campaigning, we have forced the government to pass what's called the Building Safety Act, and they've made it so that it's the financial responsibility has to sit with the building owners and with the developers who put these things wrong in the first place. But what that hasn't done is made them put the work right. And in fact, since the Building Safety Act came in that was supposed to protect leaseholders like me, it's actually made the developers and the freeholders go even slower with the pace of remediation. So actually what we're doing is putting people in an unsafe situation for far longer because they cannot force them to put right, even though they've profited from the mistakes that they've made.
What does success look like here? You obviously got people like Clive Betts on your side, and Clive is nothing if not a seasoned campaigner, and he's used to getting things done, and of course now I suppose he finds himself in government, so even more chances. But what does success look like to you?
One of the things that someone on the inquiry panel said today when I watched it was, if you are not interested in creating safe homes, then quite frankly you should not be working in construction. And I think that really tells us about the fact that there needs to be a root and branch review of the type of homes that we're building here in the UK. I think it needs everybody to be interested in it. I think it needs people who are manufacturing products that go into homes to think about whether they would want to live in that home. I think it needs builders who are cutting corners and doing things on the cheap to wonder whether they would want to be in a house that was on fire based on the materials and the way that they've constructed them. It absolutely needs everybody to demand better standards, because we want more homes in this country. We need more homes in this country. And we need people to live in high-rise and high-density housing. That's just a fact. But what we don't have to do is settle for people who will put profit before people each and every time. I think it needs everybody in the UK to want and demand better quality builds, because we can't wait for another Grenfell to happen. And at the moment, 7 years after it, all of the ingredients are in place in so many buildings up and down this country to have another tragedy like that. And I just don't think that that's a way that we want to run our country. I think everybody needs to demand better standards.
Rachael, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Can I tell you, obviously, this is the BBC, we are local radio. We're totally impartial, of course we are. This is crazy. And anything we can do to help this campaign, to make buildings safer, we will. I'll give you an absolute assurance of that. So please be in touch if you need us.
Will do. Thank you so much. I think part of the problem is there's so many people to blame that there's not one bad actor. It's really, really hard to explain the fact that so many people have done the wrong thing. And I think that's why it's really hard. So thank you so much for continuing to put it out into the news, because I know it's not an easy story to tell, but we do need it to get down to that level of clarity. And we do need ordinary people to be interested in getting better standards.
Rachael, thank you very much indeed. Rachael Loftus there from the Leeds Cladding Scandal Campaign Group.